You ever imported a walk animation and it looks like this? We're going to automate fixing that issue and several others in this short video. When working with Unity and importing animations, we often face several issues like missing avatars, generic animations instead of humanoid ones, unnamed animations in your FBX files, and animations that aren't set to loop. Manually fixing all these problems can be a time-consuming and frustrating task, especially when dealing with dozens or even hundreds of animations. To tackle these problems, we're going to create an animation post-processor in Unity. This post-processor will automatically fix the animations when they're imported into the project. Let's get started with automating animation import fixes in Unity. As we get started here, I just want to show this one animation that I brought in from Mixamo, which is just a Y-bot with a T-pose. There's nothing fancy about it here. I've extracted the materials already and I changed the colors just because that's my preference. But let's have a look quickly at the import itself. Now you can see on the rig tab here, this is still a generic animation and it has no avatar yet. And if we look in the animation tab, this is not set to loop. There's nothing special or even working about this. If I was to click play right now, it doesn't do anything. And what we really need to do before we get started with the actual code that's going to run our processing is just set up a basic animation that is the way that we want it to be, and it'll be our reference. And then we're going to make a scriptable object that'll hold all of our settings, and then we'll write the processor, and then we'll try it out. I'm just going to set this one up quickly with an animator, and then I'll make an animator controller for this, and then we'll start writing some code. All right, so I've created a couple scripts here. I'm just going to expand this out a little bit so it's easier to see. So I've made a scripts folder in my project, and underneath that I've made a folder just for the animation post-processor, and all the files that we're going to make will be in here, and I've just created two for now, and we're going to start working on this one first. So I'll bring up Rider here. We don't need any of this stuff. Let's clear that out. What we want to do here is create a scriptable object. So this won't take long to set up our different properties here. We basically want to say enabled, is this processor going to run or not? We need references to our avatar and one to the actual model. So I'll just call it FBX. This next setting, translate DOF, refers to the degrees of freedom, and I'm just going to cut over to that quickly in the inspector to show it. I think a lot of people don't know that it's even there. It only applies to humanoid animations and allows you to enable the use of translation animations for humanoid animations. So if you were to disable this option, which it is by default, the bones are animated using only rotations. Okay, just a few more. We're going to set the animation type to be humanoid by default. Let's also set loop time to be true. Let's set it to rename clips to be true. Let's force the editor to apply. I'll explain that one a little more in the processor itself. And finally, let's extract textures to be true. So if there's textures on the model we're importing, it'll pull them out for us automatically. I'm going to quickly set up this rig and animation the way that I want it. So humanoid, it's going to create its own avatar. But I want to quickly show this is what we mean by forcing the save. If we're prompted this in the editor, you get the pop-up window. So I'm going to set it back there to humanoid, create its own avatar. And I think on this one too, just because I want the other ones to have the setting, I'm going to set loop time. It's not strictly necessary here, but now our reference model is set up just the way that we want all the future animations to be similar to. Okay, I'm just going to add a create asset menu here, and then we'll be good to go on this. Okay, all that's really left here is just to create a settings and drag and drop in our avatar and our FBX. Okay, with all that out of the way, we can get going on the rest of this. So the actual workings of the processor, let's just open it up here with Rider. So first of all, we don't need any of this. And we're not going to inherit from mono behavior. We are going to inherit from asset post processor, like so. So I'm just going to quickly define the basics of this class because what I'd like to do is show in the console the order of execution of these methods. The model preprocessor will always be called before the animation one. And while I'm in here, I'll just define all the static references that I'm going to want to have throughout the class that we're going to load up from our scriptable object. So the two methods that we're going to use is OnPreprocessModel and OnPreprocessAnimation. So I'm just going to put some debug statements in there, and as soon as I'm done that, I'll just fire it off in the Unity. Okay, so I have another animation here off screen. I'm just going to drag it into the folder here so we can see what happens now with our debug statements. So as you can see, the preprocessor on the model runs right before the animation does. And we're going to use that to our advantage in a second. Let's just have a look at it quickly here. Obviously, it's not doing anything yet. This is not going to work for us at all. It's generic. There's no avatar. Let's just throw this out, and we'll bring it in again after we've done a bit of work, and I'll clear up the logs here so we can see what's going on. Okay, the first thing we need to do is make a method that'll load up our settings from the scriptable object. So let's type it out here quickly with the help of Copilot. It's almost got it right. Just going to fix this part up here. Basically, we're just going to find the very first instance of this. Maybe in the future we can adapt this to handle multiple settings files. But all we want to get really out of it is to fill up the static variables that we defined up at the top there. So we're going to use this a couple times. So we'll keep this as a method, a static method at the bottom here. Okay, let's load it up in the preprocessor for the model. If there are no settings or it's not enabled, let's just bail out. So what we want to do is get a reference to the asset importer as a type model importer. Now, asset importer is a property that's defined in the base class. So we can get that out for any type of importer that we want. Next, we want to see if we're going to extract the textures. Then let's pull them out at this point here. We can put them to wherever we had specified. And this, again, might be another feature we could add later to possibly save them into a materials folder or something else. That could be something to add. Let's put a little note about what's going on here for future reference and for the repo. Next, let's get the avatar that's on the reference FBX, and just in case there isn't one specified in the settings. Next, let's set the avatar and the rig type on the import. So that's just referenced by source avatar, and then animation type can be the same as our settings. Now, as a little bit of a catch, just to prevent any problems, if there's an issue with the reference avatar at all, Copilot here wants to throw or log an error, but what we really should do is just set it to a default type, and I think generic is good for that. Let's make a note about that. So this next part is a little trickier. What we're going to do is serialize references and copy all of the rig information over as it's mapped to the avatar, let's say. And what this actually happens already in the back end in Unity when you import a model. However, those methods are not accessible to us. What you often see people doing is using JSON files to map out different bones and armatures and get them onto the right place. And that might be necessary in very complex rigs, but it's not necessarily the case most of the time. So the method actually is called copy human description to destination, and that's what it's called in the Unity source code. We're just going to make our own version of that here. Oh, I'm just missing a couple brackets. Give me one moment here. Now let's create a new method for that. So this is actually just a one-liner. I just like to pull it out so it's just a little more human readable. So all we're really doing is copying one property from one serialized object to the other, and that is the m_human description. So that contains all the details about the armature. With that done, all we have to do is apply it. Then we can dispose of this serialized object that we don't need anymore. And now the last part will be, okay, next let's handle that degree of freedom setting that we were talking about before. So basically, we grab the human description, that degree of freedom setting that we were talking about before. So basically, we grab the human description, we set the field, and then we set it in the importer. And that's done. And finally, let's use reflection. We're going to instantiate a copy of the editor window that handles the rig, model, animation, all that. We're going to get that up in memory so that we can force the change as if the apply button had been pressed in the editor. And that will make any backend systems run. Can avoid some issues in some cases, which we won't get into right here. But basically, what this is going to do is apply all these settings and make sure that everything is correct. It'll avoid most problems that you would find. And so we've talked about reflection on this channel before. Basically what's going on here is we're going to reach into the assembly, grab a copy of that editor and instantiate it. We're going to find the apply method on it, and we're going to click that. And then once we're done, we're going to throw it out of memory. We're done with it, destroy immediately. Okay, next we can handle the pre-processing of the animation. So same thing as before. We're going to get a copy of the settings, make sure that we are supposed to be using them. I'm going to make one new method here that's going to handle all the copying of the settings, because there are many animation settings. Once we're done copying those settings, we are just going to run the import again with a force update to make sure that they're applied. So let's work on this new method for all the settings. First, I'm just going to outline the different sections, and you could think of them as like the tabs that you would see in the inspector. Those are basically how I like to sort them out here so that it conveys some meaning in the code as to what we're doing. So we got the model tab, the rigs, materials, animations, and then I'll have another section just to deal with renaming files if we're going to do that. So at the end of it, we're just going to return the importer because all the changes will be applied there. Now for this part, there are so many settings that could be applied to an animation. I'm just going to bring in the ones that I usually use with copy paste. And I'll leave them in the repo for you to take a look at. But basically, you can set just about anything you can imagine. So as you can see here, for the rig, I generally don't set too much. Same with materials. There are plenty of other options. So for the naming convention, what I want to do is grab the file name, just in case we want to use it. If it was set to rename, we'll rename it to that. Again, that could be something that could be more extravagant with our scriptable object settings file. Now, for animations, if there are no clips to copy, then we're done. Return. However, if there are, let's get the reference, get the very first animation clip that was on our reference, and we're going to use the settings for that as a backup if there's nothing else set from our settings file, which one of those settings is going to be loop time. Okay, let's create two arrays here just to hold all the default clip animations from both the reference and our imported one. And I'm just going to quickly, instead of typing it all out, I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit and paste this in here and zoom out so you guys can see the entire iteration here. And I'll just make some comments on the important parts. This will be in the repo if you want to look through all the different settings there, like, keep the original position, X, and so on. The big ones, though, are rename if we set it, and that will use the file name, and set loop time. Let's go back to Unity now, and let's reload and try it out. I'm just going to drag that same animation in here. Notice how fast that was, less than a second. So as you can see, it set the avatar, it set our type. If we look at it, the name has been changed. It's also set the loop time for us. All done. Now let's just put it in here and make sure it actually works. Hey, looking great. Let's try importing more. Let's see how long it takes to import 3 more animations. Blazingly fast. Gone are the days when you will ever manually set those sort of things again. So that's going to be a wrap for this video. All the code will be posted in the description. There'll be a link to the GitHub repo. If there's any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. We'll have lots more videos like this coming. And we'll see you in the next one.